past 25 years has seen a dramatic increase in suicide attacks. Since 1981, over 900 incidents have killed more than 9,000 people in over 20 different countries. Who are the predators?
They are not crazy. They are ordinary, unremarkable. It could be the person sitting beside you.
That was a secret life I had. I lived a selfish existence, secretive, murderous.
Are these terrorists natural-born killers? Or are they evil outcasts who kill themselves and others just to make a point?
You don't have to be evil. You don't have to be mad. You just need to be in the right context.
In the next hour, we'll take an in-depth look at factors at work in the psychology of suicide bombers. In 2001, one of the largest and deadliest acts of terrorism occurred on U.S. soil. Approximately 3,000 people were killed and over 8,000 people were injured. The threat of repeated attacks has the United States as well as many other countries on heightened alert. As the campaign to eliminate this threat intensifies, a small handful of scientists have dedicated their lives to investigating the psychology of suicide bombers. On July 7, 2005, Britain experienced its first ever suicide bombing. 4 bombs exploded in central London, killing 52 people and injuring over 700. And investigators quickly uncovered another first. These suicide bombers were homegrown. They were men who killed their own countrymen.
You have to try and think about them as human beings rather than as killers and murderers.
The challenge is to understand what motivates these kinds of men and to stop it from happening again. By piecing together information about the London bombers and combining this with our understanding of suicide attacks from around the world, these scientists are beginning to understand how and why these acts of extreme terror happen. Forensic psychologist Andrew Silk has spent the last 13 years infiltrating the extremist mind. He has worked for the British government and the United Nations. Silk's research challenges many widely held assumptions.
Most people think that terrorists are going to be the same as serial killers, the most hardcore and most dangerous and most deviant offenders that we have. And that is probably a mistake, because terrorist psychology is nothing like the psychology of those offenders. They are not like other criminals.
In an attempt to understand the London bombers, Silk is retracing their final journey. His journey begins in a small neighborhood called Beeston in the city of Leeds, nearly 200 miles from London. On the evening of July 6th, 22-year-old university graduate Shehzad Tanweer was in a local park with friends.
He was a very kind and caring person. He was respected by everybody, and he respected everybody.
If you had been watching that night, you wouldn't have thought that there was anything remarkable about him. And you certainly wouldn't have realized that within a few hours, he would be leaving this place in a car with 2 of his friends, and that car would be filled with explosives, and they'd be on their way to London.
Later that night, Tanweer met up with 2 other men. 30-year-old Mohammed Sadiq Khan and 18-year-old Hasib Hussain. Hussain had recently left school and was set to start a college course in September.
I can't imagine him doing something like this. I personally don't think he did something like this. He was obligated to do something like this.
Mohammed Khan taught at the local primary school. He was married with a 14-month-old daughter and a second child on the way.
Ordinary, nice, friendly, chatty person, you know, that would be helpful, you know, with anybody and everybody.
Nothing seemed remarkable about these 3 men as they drove out of Beeston in the early hours of July 7th.
We believe that if someone does something very extreme, then they must have a mind and a psychology which is also very extreme.
But psychological research gives us a very different insight into the nature of suicide bombers. From the early 1990s, Israel has experienced a campaign of suicide bombing. Over 5,000 people have been killed or injured in almost 200 incidents. Psychologist Ariel Marari has studied them all. For the past 20 years, he's been trying to unpick the personalities of these suicide bombers, trying to find a psychological profile to link them together.
I think what motivates me, essentially, is really the willingness to know what makes people tick. What is at the basis of certain human behaviors?
Marari began the exhaustive process of interviewing the friends and family of all the suicide bombers, and those bombers who were stopped before their bombs went off. He wanted to know if they fit a stereotype, if they exhibited any signs of mental illness.
We could get a pretty good impression of the question, first of all, were they normal or were they insane in some way? Whether these persons were suicidal. Did they want to die anyway?
But Marari found nothing that marked them out clinically.
None of the suicides was psychotic. They were not crazy. They were pretty normal people.
So he looked for other links, at factors such as poverty and education, to see if they provided a connection.
Some of the suicides were university students or college students. Some barely finished elementary school. They were different people.
After many years of research, Marari's evidence pointed in one direction. These suicide bombers did not have any psychological flaws that set them apart. Marari's simple but unsettling findings suggest that almost anyone can become a suicide bomber. Psychologist Ariel Marari has spent the last 20 years studying the personalities of suicide bombers and trying to figure out if there's a distinct common thread among them. His findings were unsettling.
No, there was no single psychological profile of a suicide terrorist, and the conclusion is that suicide terrorism must be explained primarily by something different.
At 4 a.m. on July 7, 2005, 3 men, now known as the London Bombers, head down the M1 motorway towards Luton Airport. Their car was filled with explosives. Research that has been repeated all over the world now suggests that nothing in the personalities of these 3 men would have marked them out as dangerous.
They are not crazy. They are ordinary, unremarkable. They could be the person sitting beside you. They could be the person you work with. They could be someone who lives on your street. This is something that we see again and again in the lives of suicide bombers. They are not the bottom of the barrel.
This uncomfortable truth, the idea that ordinary people can carry out such extreme acts, was first revealed in a series of simple experiments conducted over 40 years ago. In 1961, a group of American college-educated adults were recruited to take part in an experiment that was set up at Yale University by esteemed psychologist Stanley Milgram.
Well, the design was a very simple design. They had a newspaper ad requesting volunteers to take part in the study. And the study was supposed to be about learning.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please?
The volunteer is given the job of a teacher. He has to ask a pupil questions and administer a series of increasingly strong electric shocks if the pupil answers incorrectly. What these volunteers didn't know was that they were giving fake electric shocks to an actor who'd been briefed to give wrong answers.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105 volts.
Psychiatrists were asked before the study how many people they thought would follow the orders all to the end, and they thought it would just be 1 or 2%, and that those people would be psychopaths or psychologically ill.
But contrary to expectation, the study found that many people did comply with the orders, even when they could hear the recipient screaming in pain.
330 volts.
Let me out of here! Let me out of here! My heart's bothering me! Let me out, I tell you! Let me out! Let me out of here! You have no right to hold me here! Let me out! Let me out! Let me out!
Excellent, fast.
Let me out!
The volunteers continued to shock the pupils, even when it seemed that the shock was lethal.
Something's happened to that man then.
Put yourself in their shoes. They believed that they were administering electric shocks to someone who was unconscious and who may be dead. They might have killed someone. This is genuinely what they thought. And yet they kept on pressing the button to administer the shock.
All in all, 65% of people taking part in the experiment gave the potentially lethal shocks.
Are you all right? Please continue, teacher. Oh, yeah, I keep giving them shocks? Continue. I'm up to 390. Continue, please.
People can do absolutely dreadful things and yet be completely normal, completely ordinary, completely unremarkable. And if we hadn't had these experiments, we would be going around assuming that the only way terrible things happen in this world is because you have psychopaths or you have people who are mentally ill or who are just evil. And that's the only reason bad things happen. You don't have to be evil. You don't have to be mad. You just need to be in the right context.
In November 1998, 3 friends moved into an apartment together in Hamburg, West Germany. All 3 were students at the local university.
They spent a lot of time together, either at the university or at the mosque. They used to eat together very often, discussing politics into the wee hours of the night.
One of the men was Mohammed Atta, the hijacker who crashed American Airlines Flight 11 into the World Trade Center. His roommates were co-conspirators in the attack, which had turned 4 commercial planes into the largest suicide bombs in history.
When you're faced with such horror, your first impulse is not to understand, but to condemn and to kill anybody associated with them.
Ex-CIA case officer and forensic psychiatrist Mark Sageman wanted to find out exactly how the 9/11 cell had come together. He spent nearly 3 years reconstructing their lives and looking for patterns which might explain the formation of the group.
Where they're born, where did they grow up, they're religious, what kind of school did they go to, did they go abroad, who did they meet, who shared an apartment with whom. You almost have to merge each biography with the other one to see who met whom, what did they do together. And it was really a long process of piecing pieces together.
When he focused on the 6 leaders of the group, which included the 4 pilots, he noticed there was a trend. There seemed to be a pattern emerging from where they lived.
The one thing that I did find strange is most of them had joined Al-Qaeda when they were living in a country where they had not grown up. And that to me was the first surprise.
It seemed that being away from home was significant.
Living abroad makes you probably more royal than the king. We see that throughout history. The British expatriates in India in the 19th century became even more British than the British in England.
As he extended his research to accommodate more Al-Qaeda members, he found this was a pattern that repeated itself in the majority of his sample.
About 75% of my sample joined Al-Qaeda while they were living abroad.
And as his database grew, Sageman discovered another subgroup that had been cut off from their cultural origins.
Another 10% joined Al-Qaeda while they were 2nd or 3rd generation immigrants. This is very much a 2nd generation phenomenon where you're really not quite sure whether you're from the country of origin of your parents and you're not totally integrated yet in the society. You have the mafia in the United States, you have the various Hispanic gangs in the Los Angeles area. This 2nd generation phenomenon is fairly universal.
Sageman concluded that over 85% of all Al-Qaeda members had experienced some form of cultural estrangement. It seemed that he had discovered a fertile ground for creating suicide bombers. After almost 3 years of research following the 9/11 attacks, ex-CIA case officer and forensic psychiatrist Mark Sageman noticed what seemed to be a pattern of cultural estrangement in most Al-Qaeda members. 3 of the London bombers, Hussein, Tanweer, and Khan, also fit Sageman's profile. They were second-generation Muslims, born and raised in the UK after their parents had moved there from Pakistan. But the 4th bomber was different. Aylesbury, Buckinghamshire in south-central England. Shortly after 4 a.m. on the 7th of July, the 4th bomber, Jermaine Lindsay, began his journey. Lindsay was born in Jamaica to a Christian family and moved to the UK when he was still a baby. As a teenager, Lindsay converted to Islam. On the surface, it seemed that this could be a clue in understanding the links between the 4 London bombers. Anthropologist and religion expert Scott Atran had recently returned from Indonesia, where he spent time interviewing Muslim extremists with connections to the 2002 and 2005 Bali bombings that killed over 200 people. Atran's research has questioned the links between suicide bombing and religion.
There's nothing in the Quran that justifies suicide bombing, any more than there's something intrinsic to the Bible that justifies suicide bombing.
His evidence points to the activities of secular groups from around the world.
Most of the suicide bombings that have been carried out recently in contemporary history have been by Tamil Tigers, a secular group in Sri Lanka, or by Marxist-Leninist groups like the PKK in Turkey. It's only since 9/11 that most suicide bombing has been by global jihadis.
Atran concluded that suicide bombing has no direct grounding in any religion. So what is the crucial factor that turned these 4 men into suicide bombers? According to psychologists, there's a force that can be more powerful than any religious, political, or personal beliefs. It overrides an individual's personality and upbringing. And psychologists believe that it's the key to understanding suicide bombing. The Asch experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he is taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he is the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
Please begin. The experiment you will be taking part in today involves the perception of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example, if you think...
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer, or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1. 1.
1.
That's 2.
1.
Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3. 3.
3.
3.
Group dynamics is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology.
You can take anybody, virtually anybody, ordinary person, put them in a particular group, and they will become like that group.
Throughout history, the military has harnessed this power of the group to motivate individuals. Surgeon Captain Morgan O'Connell is a psychiatrist who served in the Royal Navy for 31 years.
The best military units in the world are founded on the small group. Generally, what they're looking for in training is to see whether or not you can become part of this family, this small unit. The ability to do things that in the cold light of day you wouldn't even contemplate beginning to do is founded in this grouping together of people into tight, cohesive band of brothers.
In the small neighborhood of Beeston, the evidence suggests that the London bombers were becoming a band of brothers. 3 of the men had grown up in the same close-knit community and had known each other for a number of years. The 4th bomber, Jermaine Lindsay, is believed to have met the other 3 when he was a teenager, living in nearby Huddersfield, northwest of London. Together, they spent time at a local bookshop and used a community gym housed in the basement of a local mosque.
This place is important because it was a setting for them to come together. It's not important because there was a radical imam or anything else. That wasn't the case. It was more that this was a venue where they could come together and where they did spend time together and where the friendship developed and the bonds between them developed, and that's why it's important.
These group bonds can grow surprisingly strong, resonating with our biological family unit.
The family is the most important thing in human societies. It's no accident that all political movements that survive over time use the idiom of brother and sister and mother and father. They trigger our innate desire for family and to protect and be protected by our family. If you can convince people in their inner souls to have the same sentiments as they would for their family, then they will perform the same way as they would for their family.
When individuals develop a strong, family-like bond, the power of the group can be astounding. It's a tool used by many organizations.
It's a group dynamic, like-minded people. There's the camaraderie, just like a brotherhood.
From the age of 16 to 45, Michael Stone was part of a loyalist paramilitary group. As an active member of the Ulster Defense Association, he carried out numerous assassinations for his organization.
There's guys you would die for, and you know that would die for you. Literally, I mean, give their life for you.
They form a new family that trumps the old family, a fictive, substitute, surrogate family.
And these bonds are made stronger as the group detaches itself.
You want to make that group the primary group of reference in the person's life. And in order to do that, you actually have to isolate the person from the family and bring them into the group and provide what the family does.
I led a double life. You know, my family came secondary. My parents, my sisters, no one knew I was a loyalist paramilitary. You know, it was a secret life I had. I lived a selfish existence, secretive, murderous. Family activities, family life clashed. I never went to my brother's wedding. I couldn't say to my brother, I'm not going to your wedding. I have to go out, I have an operation. I've been looking at this guy for months, and I have an operation, I have an individual to kill. How can you say that when he's having a church wedding? You can't, so you fall out with him.
As the London bombers became closer, their circle of association appears to have become smaller. The group was turning inwards, spending more and more time together, and showing signs of a shift in outlook. And there were signs of change at home. It had been reported that Mohammed Khan's marriage had recently broken down, and that he'd moved out of the family house. Relations between Jermaine Lindsay and his wife had been reported as strained too. She suspected him of having an affair because he would disappear for days at a time.
What was originally a friendship had, in the run-up to the bombing, become something which was much more radical, much more political, and had a very strong ideological focus. And it had changed from the original friendship.
The 4 men had gone from being friends to being co-conspirators in Britain's first suicide attack. At 6:51 a.m., July 7th, 2005, Hussein, Tanweer, and Khan arrive at Luton Station parking lot. They meet the 4th bomber, Jermaine Lindsay, who's been waiting there for almost 2 hours. Although never to return, They buy a parking ticket for their car. The ticket will last for a week.
A lot of people wonder, why did the bombers buy a ticket for the car? They're not coming back for the car. And the reason they buy a ticket is because every other car in this car park has one. If you're a terrorist and you're on a mission, you do not want to attract any attention whatsoever to what you're doing.
As they make their way into the station, they leave 2 primed bombs under the front seat of the car. Although homemade, these bombs have been constructed with skill and expertise. Such a high level of organization and planning seems to suggest that the 4 bombers were well connected to a wider organization, that they were recruited, trained, and supported by the experience of an organization such as Al-Qaeda. But new evidence points to a far more troubling possibility. The possibility that a group like this can develop without any outside influence at all. Mark Sageman has plotted the formation of dozens of Al-Qaeda cells. His findings are an unsettling insight into the evolution of an extremist group.
Most people think of a terrorist as a kind of weak-minded, naive young person who is preyed upon by this sinister recruiter who brainwashes him into terrorism. It turns out it's quite the opposite.
Over the course of 3 years, Sageman has mapped the lives of over 400 Al-Qaeda suspects, from London to Madrid to New York.
This cluster here is a 9/11 cluster. Each one of those dots is a person. The gray lines are physical links, relationship that people have with each other. There's enough connection to form a group.
By plotting the lives of each individual and their relationship to each other, he has been able to build up a clear picture of the point at which they joined the organization. And as his research came together, he discovered that the cells were spontaneously forming, without any connections to an established group.
The friendship bond is really the glue that holds them together, and it predates their transformation into jihadis. And people who were friends who were not originally religious, many of them drank alcohol, partied, but together they collectively radicalized each other. Being in the group is not just significant, it's crucial, it's critical. This is a form of terrorism, which is group dynamics. If you don't understand the group, you just don't understand this form of terrorism.
There doesn't need to be anybody exploiting the group. The willingness to carry out suicide attacks can predate any contact with an established group or mastermind figure.
Most young people are radicalized, and then they beg Al-Qaeda to take them. And they're very, very disappointed when they go to the training camps and Al-Qaeda decide not to select them. Only about 20%, 15 to 20% were selected by Al-Qaeda. It's very much like applying to an elite school. The elite school does not have to recruit.
(7:21 a.m., July 7th, 2005. Closed-captioned surveillance cameras catch the 4 London bombers entering the Luton train station.
One of the most remarkable features about the CCTV footage is how calm and ordinary the guys look and how casual they look. It's not the image of hardened killers on their way to commit slaughter. There are a lot of parallels between that image and the images that we have of the 9/11 hijackers, where again, here they are coming through the security check at the airport. You've no idea that these men are basically on their way to commit the worst terrorist attack in history, to kill more people in an attack than have ever been killed by terrorists before.
Being so calm under pressure shows that the hijackers were well prepared.
You know, they're familiar with this environment. went to the airports, they checked out the flights. They'd been there before. They knew what the airport was like, they knew what the security procedures were, what the planes were like, how many passengers would be on board, all of this. So it was familiar territory, and that helped them be more relaxed.
CCTV footage from the week before the London bombings suggests similar preparation.
I would expect that there would have been other dry runs, that this wasn't the only one that was carried out. The dry run would have been especially important for Lindsay because he was geographically separate from the rest of the team.
7:48 a.m. The train leaves Luton Station. (8:26 a.m.) The 4 bombers arrive at King's Cross Station and walk to the underground. Making their way to the targets, they blend in easily with the crowd. 8:30 a.m. The bombers separate and head towards separate train lines.
This is the concourse between the Circle and the Metropolitan line. And this is the point where the lines branch off, one heading east, one heading west. And it's probable that this was the last place that the bombers were together. And after this point, they had all separated, they were all alone. Now, this was a crucial phase of the operation. Would they stay committed to the cause? Would they stay committed to the group? Or would they waver and pull out?
Ariel Marari has studied these decisive final moments of suicide bombers in Israel.
Now the question is, what prevails? Fear or commitment? The closer the person gets to the target, the greater his fear.
This fear can affect people differently.
There are suicide bombers who don't hesitate. They go straight to the target and explode. Others, however, do hesitate. For instance, a case of a suicide bomber who entered a restaurant. He first got to the bar, asked a glass of water from the bartender, drank it, and only then, as nothing happened, I mean, nobody stopped him, he exploded. Now, this was last moment attempt, I suppose, to delay the final act as much as possible.
8:40 a.m. The bombers head towards crowded, rush-hour subway trains.
They are on the platform, they're getting ready to get on the train. It doesn't make a difference, in a sense, who is on the train. They would have dehumanized the victims. They're not thinking about the people they're going to kill as people. They see them as things, as monsters.
For almost 20 years, Loyalist paramilitary member Michael Stone dehumanized his victims. In 1988, he carried out his most notorious mission, launching an attack at an Irish Republican Army funeral. The assault killed 3 people and injured 60. Stone was imprisoned shortly afterwards.
I had 7 hand grenades in a pouch around my waist, 2 handguns. I pulled the pin of a grenade, and when I pulled out, I said, "There's no going back now." I threw the pin away. Could have replaced the pin and walked away. Threw the pin away. Nowhere to go now.
Many of the crowd gave chase in hot pursuit of the man who stopped, turned, and threw another grenade.
Scattered. As I moved forward, there was a voice from the back of me, "Hey boy." I looked round. This individual had appeared. Black coat, black trousers, white shirt, typical IRA steward. I turned round, fired once, he dropped. He was dead. You dehumanize that individual. You know, you don't go, "That's Paddy, and he has a wife, he has children, he has sisters." You know, because then you lose the edge. You have to say, "That's a target. That's 2 shots to the chest and 1 to the head. Do it quick." (8:50 a.m., July 7th, 2005.
3 bombs explode simultaneously on a London subway train. Shahzad Tanweer blows himself up on the Circle Line at Aldgate. Jermaine Lindsay on the Piccadilly line between King's Cross and Russell Square. Muhammad Khan on the Circle Line at Edgware Road. On the Northern Line, trains were severely delayed. It has been speculated that these delays prevented the youngest bomber, Hasib Hussein, from detonating his bomb on the train. It seems that his part of the operation had not gone according to plan. He is alive and alone.
Most people might think this is fantastic. He's still alive. He should just catch the next train, get out of London, get away, get home, start his life again.
But surveillance camera images do not show any signs of Hussein trying to flee the scene. He wandered around King's Cross Concourse and outside the station. The experience of the military may give an insight into his state of mind.
When you're in the battlefield, there's very little going on in your brain because you haven't got time for anything. You're just focused on the task in hand. And that is about using your weapon as you've been taught. Your heart rate increases, as does your respiratory rate, and there's an increased production of adrenaline. You're tensing your muscles, you're sweating, you may well get headache, your bowels might get loose, your throat might constrict, but you overcome all of these because you're focused on the task in hand. Indeed, you may not even be aware of them.
But 57 minutes pass before Hussein completes his mission. In this time, he attempts to call his fellow bombers.
It's very interesting, of course, the fact that he phoned his friends. It is possible that he indeed hesitated. He wanted to make sure that they all carried out their mission.
Eyewitness reports suggest that Hussein made his way along Euston Road. All that is known for sure is that sometime before 9:45, he boards a number 30 bus.
In that hour, what probably motivated him in deciding to blow himself up was the fact that his buddies had already done it, and he couldn't let them down.
With his 3 friends already dead, it would be extremely difficult, psychologically speaking, for the remaining 4th guy to refrain from doing it. Even if he feared death, even if he basically did not want to die, it would be very, very difficult for him psychologically to refrain from completing his mission.
At 9:47 a.m., the 4th bomb explodes. Altogether, the 4 bombers have killed 52 people and injured over 700.
When dealing with terrorism, people like to believe it's formally organized. It's just a finite number of evil people, and if we just eliminate them, we'll get rid of the problem. The reality is that it's very different.
Most of human behavior is driven by small group dynamics. That is, the group of 8 or 10, 12 people that are in your immediate environment.
It's critical to spot the groups. It's critical to understand why people become radical, how they become radical, and it's critical so that we can stop that and prevent that from happening.